Hello, fans of You're Free to Go. Welcome back. We're happy to have you here. I'm in the studio today in Boca Raton at Podcast Junkies, and Mark is in LA. So I'm gonna wish Mark, hello, Mark, come join us from LA. How you doing?
Good morning. Doing great and anxious to hear our next topic.
Well, it's a good one today. It is definitely a good one. It's a hot topic. We're going to talk today about HOAs, homeowner associations, and the criminal behavior and arrests that occur at HOA meetings and through the experiences of homeowner association events and so forth. I want to remind our listeners and our viewers to please like, follow, subscribe, do all those things that you're supposed to do in social media these days, like post and whatever it is, because we're getting a lot of good energy out there with this podcast, and we want to keep it flowing. Mark and I keep bringing our crazy ass stories to you, no matter what. So, but we do appreciate when all our listeners are following and subscribing, which is free, of course. So we're going to get into that in a second. I first want to just point out, though, that we have had a lot of comments from people that we're now at like episode 53, I think we're on, and we drop one episode a week every Friday. So if you count back 53 weeks, we're currently in July of 2026. We launched this in August of 25, so almost a year ago now. And I've been getting some comments recently, Mark, and basically saying, Guy, you look like a different person than the one who started this back a year ago, in August. Like, what is going on with you? So I got to give a little shout out to Eli Lilly and Manjaro because we share not only our cases with you guys, but you're getting to know a little bit about us as people. And we mentioned a vacation here or there that we've gone on, or family, or this or that. So share with our listeners. Yeah, I am. As I sit here today, I'm down 53 pounds. I have a whole new wardrobe, jackets and suits that actually fit, necks that fit. After losing 53 pounds, and I'll tell you, it's a great feeling because I would go to my doctor. This is kind of a little interesting little story I'll share with the listeners because there's a little legal aspect to it. I go to my regular doctor like twice a year, 3 times a year, just general practitioner for a checkup. And for years, he's like, Guy, you do need to lose weight. You need to lose weight. We have the same conversation every time I go, and I have the same response to him every time. I said, Doc, I know, and I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to diet. I'm going to lose the weight the old-fashioned way, maybe 1 to 2 pounds a week. And he always says, well, how's that working out for you, Guy? Every time I see him. And we're going back years, twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year for years. And I said, not so well, but that's what I'm doing. And about 3 years ago, he wrote me a prescription for Mounjaro. He said, you should really take it. And when I went back to him a couple months later for my regular checkup, I said, Doc, I got the prescription. It's in my refrigerator. I'm not taking it. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. So a couple months later, I was back. He said, did you start taking it? I said, no, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. So last like February, so was that like 6-7 months ago, I went to his office, and he said, come on, Guy. I said, and I knew, by the way, before going that day, he was going to ask me the same thing. Hey, why aren't you taking it? You need to take it. So I actually looked at it. It's been in my refrigerator at this point for like 2 years, the prescription, and it had expired like 8 months earlier. So I said, Doc, it expired 8 months ago. I looked at it today. I'm throwing it out. He's like, you're never going to take it. I said, no, Doc, I'm never taking this. I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. I know it's not working yet, but it will. I'm going to diet. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to exercise, and I'm going to lose weight the old-fashioned way. So he says to me, Guy, I get it. I accept that. You're never going to do it. He said, but a lot of people take a B12 shot, and a B12 shot will give you more energy, and then you'll work out a little harder. And when you work out a little harder and you have good energy, I think you'll eat healthier because you don't want to ruin the workout you had. And so I said, Doc, a lot of people I know take that B12, so I'm okay with that. It's like a vitamin. I'll take a B12 shot. So he says, great. He said, I'll give you B. So he gives me a shot of B12. He looks me in the eye and he says, congratulations, you just took Mounjaro. I said, what? I said, no, I thought it was B12. And he lifts up his hand. He says, give me a high five. You can't be mad at me. It's my job to do what's best for you, for your health. And you needed this. And you can't be mad at me. And you're going to call me in a week and you're going to thank me. And I gave him the high five. I said, Doc, I'm not mad at you. I get it. Thank God my health was fine, but I was on the verge. If I gained any more weight, I'm sure I would have started looking at diabetes issue, blood pressure issues, and all sorts of other, medical problems that are accompanied by being overweight. So I wasn't mad at him. But that's the legal nuance that I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago before I started sharing my personal story with our listeners, is that people have said to me, wow, you're a lawyer. He knows you're a lawyer. I can't believe he gave you something as a lawyer without getting your, permission, authorization first. But at the end of the day, I think the doctor's oath, the Socratic oath, if not what's the oath the doctors take, Mark? It's Socratic. Their oath, the Hippocratic oath, Hippocratic oath is
Hippocratic oath,
right.
yes.
It's to do no harm, and to help pay. And he was helping me. He was doing no harm. He was helping me, and he was right. A week later, I called him. I said, Doc, I lost 4 pounds in my first week, and thank God, like I said, my health was fine. But I do feel better. I have better energy, and 53 pounds later, I'm kind of where I want to be. I'm maybe another 5 or 8 pounds, but it's fun. I would look in my closet before, and I'd have nothing to wear. I'd say I can't wear that too tight. Can't wear that too tight. And I'd wind up having like 2 or 3 things that I could wear, and I was repeating them all the time. So I'm glad. I'm glad I did this. Really happy. It feels great, and. I do realize, we talk a lot in our, criminal, this true crime podcast. Some of our clients will have addiction or dependency issues to drugs or mental health issues and so forth that cause them to get in their trouble. For me, I do realize in hindsight that, because I've been studying a lot about these GLP-1s, Mounjaro, Ozempic, there's all sorts of them out there now you can hear about. And what they do is they affect the addiction part of your brain. They do a lot of good things. Like, in fact, the articles I've been reading say they're so healthy for you, for brain health, for heart health, for kidney health, that these drugs, these GLP-1s, should be in the water, just like fluoride. They're saying that's how healthy and good these GLP-1s are for our health. So I've been reading a lot about it. And I think for me, I realize in hindsight now that I do have an addiction to carbs. Like, I realize now that when I eat a carb, say a piece of bread, I immediately am triggered to want more and more and more food, especially carbs. So this medication, the GLP-1, for me, it suppresses my addiction to the food. So I'm not really thinking about it. I would often think about food, what we call, food, a voice or hearing, food thoughts all the time. I don't have those anymore on this GLP-1, and it's really a cool feeling just to eat normal. I get full pretty quickly because it's just not an addiction anymore. I do know people that don't do as well on these GLP-1s, and those are typically people, again, I'm not a doctor, but I've been paying close attention to this since it's been part of my life. I think people who have, they eat out of emotion. It doesn't do well with these drugs. Don't do that well with those individuals because, and when I say emotion, I want to define that. It could be depressed, it could be sad, but it could also be happy, excited, celebration. It could be bored. That's an emotion. So those people, I've been again talking to people like that who haven't been doing well. They could eat like a Thanksgiving dinner and be so full, but when they're eating out of emotion, they'll continue to eat. Because they're stuffing emotions down, they're coping, whatever it may be. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or a social worker or therapist of any sort, but it just seems from my observations and my reading in the last few months about this that those individuals have to work harder when they're on the GLP-1 to be successful at it if they're eating out of emotion, as opposed to the people who eat out of addiction. And I clearly am in that category where I did eat out of addiction. And so I'm really, really pleased with it, and thanks to these, you talk about big pharma, they get knocked a lot for the money they make, and and for some people think that this whole pain pill epidemic is because big pharma pushed these pain pills out there to be more profitable, so they get knocked, and maybe it's appropriate to knock them, and for a lot of things, but I do appreciate that they came out with a medication like this, and because it's changed my life for the better, as well as many, many other people. In fact, I would not want to be a company that owns a diet center or like a lean cuisine diet food company, because these medications, not only are they working really well, but they're actually improving them. Like one of the negatives about this Mounjaro they were saying is that you kind of lose muscle, and all of them, Ozempic and so forth, is that you can lose some muscle. And so now they're saying that they have a new and improved version where you don't lose muscle. I'm sticking with what's been working for me, and I've been going to the gym, so that losing muscle hasn't been an issue. But that's why if all of you listening to the podcast who actually watch it as well on any of the mediums where you can watch it, like YouTube, if you've noticed that I'm half the man I used to be when we started this, that's why. That's the secret. So thanks.
Well, you look great. You look great, Guy, and I think that we deserve sponsorship from Manjuro.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and no, really, and it's wonderful that you look great, you feel great. It does change your attitude, um, and you take some command of your life. And I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
uh,
Well, you're always inspiring
now,
me because you always, whenever we're together, you eat healthy, you exercise, regularly and aggressively, and so you are an inspiration to me as well. So I appreciate that. It's more than
well, thank you.
yeah. All right, so on to our topic. These
Yes.
HOAs, homeowner associations. The first time I saw one, I was a prosecutor. And it's ironically, I get this case on my desk, and the irony of it was that it was from the neighborhood I lived in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But since that day, and we're going back to 1992, I've seen these every couple times a year. For some reason, HOAs, homeowner associations, are prone to extreme emotional rage and opinionated outbursts, and just dissension. And it can get ugly. And I'm not quite sure why. Sometimes I think, well, you got all these people. And for those of you who don't know, an HOA is anytime there's a neighborhood, residential neighborhood. And by the way, businesses have it too, but I'm personally talking about residential. It could be homes in a neighborhood that have this association that manages things like maybe a common area with a pool or a playground, or maybe there's a security gate, or maybe there's landscaping that's involved. And so they create this association where everyone throws a little bit of money every month toward it. And could be a lot of money depending on your neighborhood. And that association manages those things. And so you have elections for officers, and you have debates on whether they should fix the gate to the entrance of the community. And if they do that, they have to assess the homeowners. But it also applies to if you live in a condominium, where they have the same issues. And so they form a homeowner association as well. And I guess you get all these different homeowners that have worked really hard, or maybe they didn't work hard. Maybe they inherited the money, but they worked hard for their money. They inherited the money, whatever it may be. And they all, think they know what's going on, and they have an opinion, they have a perspective, and it's often could be different from one homeowner to the other, and it can get ugly. And so, and everyone thinks they're right. And the end game that pulls us into it as criminal defense lawyers is they do occasionally end up in a violent episode where there's an arrest that is made. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And by the way, Mark, in the cases I've had, I'd say 9 out of 10 of them arise out of an election, a meeting, a HOA meeting where the annual election was taking place, where the losers get angry at the winners, and then they start literally, either threatening each other and get arrested for assault, which is a verbal threat to harm someone, or for battery, which is a physical attack where there's physical contact made against somebody. So, and also to lay the table for this topic, Mark, for our listeners, is that they should understand the prosecutors and the police, they hate these cases. They hate, because they say, oh, these people, they have their homes and they're arguing over these stupid issues. Their home is their castle. They should be happy. Life is good. They're living the dream. It's ridiculous of what they're fighting over. And very often the disputes are over, really things that are in the big picture of life that are so not important and they're so trivial. But the emotions rage, the opinions get heightened and so forth, and it gets ugly. And so prosecutors, and the police, they don't like bringing these cases, but they're forced to bring them because it's, there's two sides to every story. And in these cases, the two sides are, extremely electrified. Like the victim is furious and they're firing on all cylinders, the victim is, and the person arrested can't believe they've been arrested. They're so angry. It wasn't my fault. It was their fault. They initiated it. And so you get these two sides that are pushing really, really, really hard. One, hey, you shouldn't prosecute. This is ridiculous. They're the bad guy. And the other one, who's listed as the victim, saying, you need to, this guy needs to be buried below the courthouse or below the jail. They're such a horrible person. And because it's got this, it's just so inflamed that prosecutors and police, they have to pursue them. They can't just drop them, but they hate them because they think they're over trivial matters. And they're like, you guys are so, you have such a life is good. Why can't you just get along and deal with this outside the court system? Just shake hands, hug it out, stay away from each other, and appreciate, that what you have in life. So they're really, really unpleasant cases to handle. And let's say if I use an example of like a battery, a battery between two strangers that are maybe they're at a bar watching a sporting event and one team wins, the other loses, and one guy pushes the loser because they said something stupid. Those cases, you'll have to put in. I'm just going to use a hypothetical here, maybe 15 hours to resolve that case as a criminal defense lawyer. But if that same battery occurs at an HOA meeting, I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen who are listening to us, that case will take 200 hours to resolve because the parties on both sides are so active and so engaged in the process and that's one of the other reasons prosecutors and police hate it, because they know that the demands, these people are calling every connection they have and they're pushing. So it's annoying. And like I said, my first case that I ever had was in 1992 as a prosecutor. It happened to be in a neighborhood that I lived in. It was a gated neighborhood. It was at an election, and I must have gotten, I was a rookie prosecutor. I think I got 100 phone calls from people involved in that case. 50 that were there at the meeting representing saying the victim was the victim, and I got to fight hard for this victim. And 50 of the phone calls came from people at the meeting who said the defendant did nothing wrong, the victim's a horrible person, they deserved it. It was insane. So that was my introduction to these homeowner association fights and so forth. Mark, I think you might have one. I have a few other, specifics I want to get into, but I'll kind of let you run with it.
Well, I'll tell the one that I had, only one, but very early in my career, I had moved down from New York to Florida with my then wife, and a buddy of mine who I went to law school with, who was working for a big law firm in New York, and we opened a practice in the middle of nowhere out in Plantation, Florida. In fact, we had a cow pasture across from
Well,
us in the field. And
now Plantation's a big community, but I know the
oh no, it's
yeah,
yeah, enormously
yeah,
congested now, but back then it wasn't. There was the mall, a brand new Broward Mall had been built, and um, Jack and I used to hang out in the mall during the day and call the office to our then assistant and ask her if anybody called. Back then, this was before the internet, actually, even about the beginning of cell phones, but they were the Motorola bricks. And we used to practice what we call door law, meaning anything that walked in the door, we
yeah.
would handle. People would say, "What's your specialty?" We would say, "Your need is our
I
specialty."
like that.
Um,
I think that's a
but
great tagline for a law firm.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But in any event, I got hired to represent a homeowners association in a local condo complex. Needless to say, I didn't know much about it, but I did study up on it, and it wasn't that complicated back then. And I remember going to the first homeowners association meeting. I was asked to come because, as the legal officer for the homeowners association, I was there to kind of monitor things, and I began to understand what you're talking about. Back then, I was less of a monitor, more of a referee at a boxing match.
Yep,
And
I know that.
it it got heated right away. I mean, really heated right away. And I don't even to this day remember what it was about, except remembering that it was probably something very trivial and very stupid. But like you say, these people, it's your home. It's the place where you live. If you're in a condo, especially, you're, jammed in with all these other people. You got to smell their cooking. You got to deal with their noise. You got to
True.
deal with all the issues that people present. So I'm at this meeting, and all of a sudden, the shouting gets louder and louder between these two individuals, one older man and one younger man. And it rose to the level that the older man actually was the one, I remember this, gets up out of his chair, walks over to the other guy, younger guy, who was like twice his size. And the younger guy stands up, towering over him, and the older man pushes him, and he pushes him back. And of course, what happens is like right out of the movies.
Oh yeah.
He knocks down somebody else who's sitting in a chair.
Ah,
Well, it was like the bar fight in the old westerns.
uh,
Before you knew it, there are a couple of punches being thrown, and it descends into chaos. I was like sitting there shocked because I'd come from being a prosecutor in New York, prosecuting drugs, organized crime, serious people. I mean, real criminals.
yeah. I mean,
And here are these people. I was expecting, we were just going to have a chat.
well, that's exactly my point with the police and the prosecutors, why they don't like these cases either. They're like, look, we're dealing with drug trafficking, arson,
Right.
murders, and now we got to spend like an exorbitant amount of time on this HOA matter that's foolish. That's exactly what you
Yeah.
just said. Right.
So what happens is I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, and it's escalating quickly, but it's still primarily between these two guys. So I don't know why, but I decided, maybe I thought, being a lawyer, I could stop it. But how do I stop it? I actually got in the middle of these two guys. I pushed my hands, pushed them back a little, and I said, "Come on, stop it." And I don't remember what else I said, but to that effect. And next thing you know, I get clocked in the nose.
No, you
And
didn't.
oh yeah,
Oh,
and I didn't go down, but
right.
I was reeled.
Wow.
I mean, and uh this is going on for about another minute or two, and all of a sudden, some cops come in the door of the meeting room, and somebody must have called the police. I'm grabbing my nose because it hurts like hell. I think I was bleeding a little from the nostrils.
Right.
Wasn't bad, but bleeding a little. And um, a cop comes up to me, and somebody pointed me out as the lawyer, and he couldn't believe that I got hit. And he said, "Who hit you?" Now I had a pretty good idea of who hit me. I wasn't 100%
Right.
certain, but probably
And
close enough.
And by the
But
way,
I didn't want.
hold your thought though, because as a defense lawyer, a couple times in life I've been in that situation where I'm a witness of something, or in your case, you're the victim, and I'm very torn between whether to participate. I was at a restaurant sitting outdoors, and I saw a driver crash their car. Right, they could have been very serious, but no one got hurt, and they were investigated for DUI. And the officer came over to us and said, "What did you observe?" and so forth. And as a defense lawyer, like here you are being asked to, point out, identify the person that committed a battery on you, a crime on you. I don't know. As a victim, I guess of course you
Mhm.
participate, but I don't know. Did you have any hesitation to say, you know what, I don't want to? I'm a defense lawyer. I'm not.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to get involved for a couple of reasons. Because right off the bat, something instinctively told me, the minute I start becoming a witness to this thing,
That's true too.
my tenure,
Yeah,
my tenure as the legal officer, the attorney for the condo association, is probably over.
that's right.
Okay.
You now have a conflict
So,
of interest.
and the truth is, and I hate to say this, but I'll put it in the simplest terms I can. Um, may not be so politically correct, but the bottom line is, I mean, come on. I grew up in a time where you got into fights when you were a kid.
Right.
Somebody hits you, whatever. Hopefully, you guys make up. You apologize. It's not a big deal as long as there's no permanent injury. I'm just tired of all these pussies here making claims of battery
That's true.
because they get hit or they get pushed or they get poked in the chest.
Yeah.
Give me a break. I mean, grow up,
Right. I
you know,
agree. I
toughen up.
Yeah.
But so in any event, I didn't want to get involved for a whole bunch of reasons. And also, I wasn't 100% sure, and I don't want to dime out somebody who, as it turns out, may have not been the one who threw the punch.
Of course.
And, I didn't have any permanent damage. Um, my nose was already screwed up from football years ago.
Right.
So,
It looks
what am I
pretty
going
good. It
to
looks good now, though, Mark.
do?
I don't know
Well,
what you've done, but you grew
well, it's
into it.
gone both ways. It was knocked left, then it
Right.
was knocked
Right.
right.
So now it's
So
straight.
it straightened itself out.
Yeah.
But so anyway, but the police wound up arresting um, the both of the individuals who started the fight because everybody else was talking to the cops and told them about it.
Right.
And then they wanted me, to your point, they wanted me to be a witness
Yeah.
to what happened. And I remember talking to the assistant state attorney at the time, and I had just left the prosecutor's office, so I kind of had more of a synergy with this young assistant in talking to him and pointed out that I'd been a DA in New York and everything. And I said, look, um, I think it's probably better to use the other people. Everybody witnessed this. You don't need me.
Yeah.
You don't need me as a witness. Well, the end result is I did follow the case, and I did stay on as the legal advisor, as the attorney for the condo association for about another year. But I did follow the case, and what happened, obviously, is it canceled itself out.
Sure.
They wound up now prosing both cases against the two individuals who fought,
Right, which is a Latin
and
term meaning no prosecute or drop a case.
right.
Yep, dismiss. Mhm. Yeah.
And what's interesting is about 3 months later, I remember there was another contentious argument in the homeowner association meeting. Didn't result in fisticuffs, but the two individuals who fought each other, who got arrested, wound up becoming allies in the argument.
Right.
And I thought that that was very interesting.
Yeah, that is
So, they had a little childhood fight, and that was it.
well,
And it was almost no harm, no foul. My nose recovered, and everybody was the better off for it. Of course, that was probably the most benign example. I'm sure you have
um,
some
no,
serious
I do with
ones.
arrests, and so well, and I said this earlier. I said the prosecutors and the police are just like, why can't these guys just shake hands, hug it out, just kind of stay away from each other and move forward? So you're right. I mean, that's really in your example. That's what happened here. These guys moved on, and now they're actually allies. Well, I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm not that smart because I actually am a glutton for punishment, as they say. I'm on the board of my condo HOA right now. And early on, we had an issue at a board meeting with a resident, and they were getting out of control. The police had to be notified. No one was arrested. The police didn't even come into the meeting actually. So, but there was discussion from the board level, like, what do we do about this? Like, your residents have the right to speak up. They're shareholders, stakeholders in the association, and so forth. And so what we did as a HOA board was we passed a code of conduct. And it really has helped. I mean, it's been in effect for quite a while, and our meetings have been much more effective. There's no outbursts and so forth because everyone's aware of the code of conduct, and we're all kind of rowing in the same direction because we realize we're all here for we all have the best intentions at heart and so forth. So it worked. It doesn't always work because as I sit here today, and Mark, you sit in California today, I have two open cases in my law firm that are independent cases that were two people arrested at their HOA meetings at an election. Both of those HOAs had code of conduct. So it's working in my condo, fortunately, but it doesn't work in every condo. People violate those codes all the time. And then, obviously they can get brought up on, different discipline issues before they're homeowner. Not only could they get arrested, but they can get there's discipline where, the homeowner association has the right to do certain things like, limit your access to the public spaces on the property and the gym and things like that. I can't talk about those cases because they're, as I said, they're open, active cases. But I want to say, how do the cases get resolved? Your case was interesting because they canceled each other out. You've got two defendants that were also victims, and they're like, look, I'll drop the charge against you. You drop the charge against me. Of course, they personally can't drop the charges. The government, the prosecutor, has the power to drop the charges. So they entered the null process, you said, the dismissal or no prosecution. But these are often very difficult cases to resolve because, as I said earlier, the victims pushing hard with their 50 people that were witnesses, the defendants pushing hard with their 50 witnesses, and so forth. And sometimes the government has, video evidence. But what we're dealing with is very often these are people that have no prior criminal history. They're otherwise very successful, law-abiding, productive members of society. And so, they got triggered, maybe, who knows, what the actual circumstances were. They're always different. No two cases are the same. But the prosecutor's stuck between a rock and a hard place because they would like to just say, hey, you guys, shake hands, hug it out, move on with your lives, just respect each other, stay away from each other if that's the issue. But unfortunately, the prosecutors can't just drop these cases when you have a victim pushing it and pursuing it. But then you say, well, this defendant, again, law-abiding, productive member society, this is the one blemish on their record. Do they really deserve to walk away with a criminal? No one was physically hurt. In your case, sometimes they are, a little bloody nose, but, most of my cases, these are older people that, no one's getting injured. And maybe there's some embarrassment, but no, broken bones or things like that, no concussions and so forth. And so what happens is the prosecutor wants to offer, and I think we've talked about this in other episodes, the PTI program, or pretrial intervention, also known as diversion, or these deferred prosecution programs where basically a person goes on probation for a few months, they jump through a few hoops, they stay out of trouble, complete some community service, maybe write a letter of apology, maybe have a anger management evaluation or drug evaluation and follow up with treatment, and then the case gets null prossed or dismissed, dropped. And that's a very nice outcome for someone. So there is a consequence, but at least this person who's law-abiding and otherwise productive member of society doesn't walk away with jail or a criminal conviction on their record. Well, every state that has these programs called PTI, pretrial intervention, deferred prosecution, that offer this ultimate dismissal, those statutes always say the victim has to agree. The court, the prosecutor, they can't offer these programs unless the victim agrees. Well, in these HOA, very volatile cases, highly emotionally charged and raging cases, the victim doesn't agree to that. And now the prosecutors are, again, like I said, stuck between a rock and a hard place because they really think these are frivolous matters. And of course, some are serious. I don't want, there are going to be some HOAs that are more serious matters. But in general, they're not. And the prosecutors are like, I don't want this person to walk away with a criminal record or be put on probation. So, they're really hard. And then if you're defending, like we are, the defendant, all these times they're like, I'm going to get a criminal record from this. I could go to jail. Look, we had an argument. If I cross the line, I apologize, but I'm 65 years old. I've never done anything wrong in my life. I could line up 1,000 people that are going to tell you what a good person I am. I really don't see why I should wind up with a criminal record. So these cases are so tough, and they're very, very time consuming. And like I said, you don't only have the criminal exposure, but you have the grievance issues that you have to deal with at your HOA board as well. So I had a case where this woman would walk her dog all the time, and she lived in a HOA community, a community that had an HOA, Homeowner Association, and she didn't like her neighbor. The two of them were always kind of, they didn't get in, in a fist fight, but they just didn't like each other. And so one day, this woman walking her dog saw the neighbor. The neighbor gave her some lip. The dog walker wasn't very happy, so she basically said to the neighbor, she said to her dog to bite the neighbor, bite the neighbor, bite the neighbor. And this happened actually on several occasions. And at one point, she actually, on one occasion, the last of the occasions that led her to hiring me, she actually let go of the leash and the dog ran toward the person. The dog was not trained to bite anybody, probably didn't even understand the command bite, but it did run toward the person. The person got very scared. This is her neighbor. It's a shame that people can't be neighborly. You hear about these neighbor fights a lot. And the owner of the dog did not get arrested, although the police were called. They were not going to make an arrest over this because no one was bit. But there was a HOA, discipline or complaint filed. There was a grievance committee, and I was hired to go represent this person before the committee. And these are crazy things. There's like 10 homeowners on the board. There's 3 lawyers in the room. They have a private investigator there. They have everything you can imagine. The manager of the club is there and everything. And they took it really seriously, very, very seriously. And then there's some politics involved. The victim had a lot of influence. They had lived there longer than the woman with the dog. They didn't like the woman with the dog, and they loved the woman who was the victim, and her husband had been on the board and all this. So they get very political. A lot of pulling strings and influence gets involved. And at the end of the day, with this hearing, they wound up suspending the woman who owned the dog for a year. And this was a gated country club community. So what it meant was, by being suspended, it meant that if a friend of hers was having a wedding in their clubhouse, she was not allowed to attend. She was literally not allowed. She had to pay full dues, and she was not allowed to use the clubhouse country club facilities for an entire year. The other thing that is a weird kind of punishment is that the community has a gate. You can drive, if you're an owner, you drive through, you have a bar card or a little transponder on your windshield, and the gate just opens. But there's another lane for guests. It's security. The guest pulls up, they check in at the gate with the security guard, they give their name, ID, they make sure they have permission, the guard makes sure they have permission to be on property, and then they let them through the gate. Well, one of the consequences besides the 1-year suspension was that they could no longer go through the resident owner gate. They had to go through the security, which was actually annoying because, often there's 2, 3, 4, 5 cars in line and you're waiting there for 5 minutes and so forth. So that sounds kind of trivial, but it actually was. And I've had cases where that's happened before, where that was one of the sanctions, and that the client hates that more than anything. The other case I kind of share with you about that same sanction was, Mark, you kind of referred to the pushing. There was a guy working out in the gym, and he wanted to. It was a gym in a neighborhood, and so they had an HOA, and he wanted to take this basketball and go do some dribbling exercises outside the gym. So he's dribbling and he's rushing and he's doing like these to keep his heartbeat going. He's going back and forth really fast. So on one of his events going in and out of the gym, he was moving so fast that he knocked into somebody. It was an older woman. Again, she wasn't injured, but she was startled and she did lose her balance and so forth. And he got brought. He actually did get arrested. A little side note: when he was so scared about being in jail, but as I said, he was in the gym. He was playing some basketball. He had some really nice brand new high tops on. So he got to jail and he found the biggest person in the jail. They looked like he had about the same shoe size, and my client gave the guy, it was a smart move. He said, "Hey, you want my high tops?" Gave him the high tops, and now the next 36 hours before he was released from jail, the biggest guy in the cell was protecting my guy. So it was actually a pretty smart move. But he got out of jail. The criminal charges were actually never filed at that point, but he also had this, I think he had a 30-day suspension, couldn't use the club. But he also had to go through this security side of the gate, which drove him crazy. 2 final cases I want to share that are a little more involved. There was this one I'm going to call "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished." So we have on the board, you don't get paid. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm on the board, I'm the glutton for punishment. This is something that some days I'll have 3-4 hours of HOA work, for being on the board. Of course, there are days where nothing comes up, but I would say on average, there's a good hour a day of work. It's a lot of responsibility. You have to take courses, you have to be certified and so forth to be on the board. You have fiduciary obligations. You're, maybe approving bills and the expenses and invoices. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And we don't get paid. No one on the board gets paid. So no good deed goes unpunished. This gentleman was the president of the board. It was a residential neighborhood. It was not a condo. And there was he kept getting complaints about, there was someone who bought a house in his neighborhood, and they were what we call a flipper. They bought a house for, let's just say, $100. They were going to put $100 of renovations into it. So now they're into it for $200, and they're going to put it up for sale for $400. I'm sure most of our listeners and viewers understood what I meant by flipper, but in case they don't, I wanted to explain it. This is a home, this is a businessman who flips homes. He buys them, he fixes them up, and he sells them for a profit. And so this gentleman really, excuse my language, but he didn't give a shit about the neighborhood. He didn't give a shit about the rules of the neighborhood. All he cared about was getting this renovation done as quickly as possible and selling the house as quickly as possible for his highest return on his investment. So unfortunately, by ignoring all these rules, and doing whatever he wanted, this homeowner, this flipper, he wasn't moving in the home. He bought it just to fix it up and sell it to somebody else. He was violating every rule, putting garbage out on days that you're not allowed to put garbage out. That's one of the rules HOA associations establish. If garbage pickup from the city is on Tuesday and Thursday, you can put your garbage out Monday night, and it has to be taken away by Tuesday at noon or whatever. So they have lots of crazy rules. You can't park on the even side of the road on Tuesday, on even days. You can't park here, you can't park there, you can't park on the grass. So they have all sorts of rules. Well, this guy, the flipper, was violating every rule, and all the neighbors was a problem. So they were all complaining about him. So he must have had, 50 complaints, so many complaints. The property manager kept talking to him. And then they were doing things like trying to fine him and so forth. And he just ignored everything. So one day the property manager calls my client, who becomes my client because of this incident, who is the president of the HOA. And he says, look, this homeowner continued, and of course my client and the entire board had been fully informed every time this guy violated. The manager says he's violated again. He just simply refuses to listen to us. He simply refuses to follow the rules. We got to do something. So the president, who becomes my client, says, you know what? I'm going to go down to him. I'm going to very, politely go to his home and discuss this issue with him, see if I can get him, to start complying, and explaining why he's creating, a dangerous, situation for a lot of the homeowners because he's blocking the street and so forth. Cars are having to go, drive on the wrong side of the road to get past his workers and all this. And so what happens is he goes to the home with all good intentions, hoping to maybe mediate this thing and get this guy to get on board. Maybe just find out that the guy's going to be done within 30 days, and maybe he'll say, okay, we'll put up with it for 30 more days, and then you're done. And when he gets there, he goes to the front door. The door is wide open, and he sees a worker, and he says, oh, will you get Mr. So-and-so, the owner of the house? So the worker runs and gets him. But before the owner comes to the door, he gets to the door and he says to my client, he says, well, just want to let you know the police are on their way. I just called them. They're on their way. The police show up. They arrest my client for trespass and actually burglary because he had 1 foot inside the door of the home. And so which is unbelievable, right? He's doing no good deed goes unpunished. Here's a president of a HOA who makes no money, who puts a ton of time into this obligation, and he was just going there to try to help the whole community and even work with this gentleman to get him on board so that he could get his house finished and make his profit and move on. And he winds up sitting in jail. This guy, going back not that long ago, maybe 3 years ago, I think he was, if I remember correctly, he was mid-60s, very successful businessman, really good person, great reputation in the community and so forth. He became an HOA president because people trusted him and thought he was, the right guy to lead their homeowners association. Well, now he winds up locked up in the clink. He's in jail. So, of course, I bond him out and I get him bonded out and so forth. And now we have to defend the case. So, fortunately for him, because he's freaking out, never been in trouble in his life. He doesn't want a criminal record, doesn't want to sit in jail any longer, be sentenced to jail, all these things are going through his head. His wife is scared to death. It's affecting their health. They're so nervous and stressed over this. Never been in this situation before. And so basically, I read the case, I review everything, and I file a motion to dismiss. The motion to dismiss was granted. And as I said earlier, this episode or other episodes, Mark and I, we've said that, it's rare to get a motion to dismiss granted. Fortunately, we have a higher percentage of success than most lawyers, and this was one of those times where it was granted. The reason I got it granted, or the way I was able to get it granted, was that the Homeowners Association rules, when someone buys a home, they have to sign off on all the documents, and one of the rules said that any board member is allowed to go onto the property and into the home of any resident for official HOA business. Now, in this case, we were able to prove in our when we made our motion to dismiss argument with evidence that the door was wide open. If the door had been closed, I think we would have lost the motion to dismiss. But we were able to prove that the garage door was wide open and that the front door was wide open and that people were coming in and out of the house. And he was there on official HOA business. And I also think the judge saw through the nonsense and saw that this guy never should have been arrested. So he granted that motion to dismiss, fortunately. But still, it was I think my client has PTSD from this, which I understand. I get it. It's very scary for someone that's never been in trouble before. They're, in their later years, mid 60s, they're retiring and so forth, to go through that situation. The other scenario, but the other case I wanted to share was a similar one, as far as no good deed goes unpunished. But in this case, the guy really did do something wrong, and it was serious. He was also a president of an HOA, so that's why it's a similar situation. And it's similar because there was one homeowner, and this was a very expensive neighborhood, actually. This one homeowner was just refused to follow the rules. And it wasn't so much the homeowner as it was their kids. They had several kids that were just, it was a neighborhood that there weren't many kids in. It was an expensive neighborhood, a gated country club, high-end, relatively pretentious and materialistic and so forth. And these kids were unruly and they were undisciplined. And the whole neighborhood, and this section of the neighborhood really only had adults, and I think they were the only kids in this section of this gated country club community. Kind of to set the table for everyone, if you're not familiar with gated country club communities, is that let's just take a mile square. It's a square mile, piece of land. A big wall is built around that land, a square mile. There's a gate to come in and out. It could have 3 different entrances and exits, or 4, or 1, or 2. And within that square mile, you have a golf course. You have a country club that has a pool and some dining. It may have some tennis courts, pickleball courts, a field for outdoor activities like a exercise boot camp. It has a gym. So it's like going to a sleepaway camp, like Camp Tawanda. I'm holding up my Camp Tawanda coffee cup right now. So it's like that. Anyway, within that they have little villages or so forth, little communities. They have 20 different communities. They all have different types of homes. Some could be attached. Some could be, less expensive. Some are more expensive. These little villages within the gated country club community, or within the walled-in community. So this little village happened to be the most expensive in that community, and there weren't many kids in there. This was actually the only house that had kids in it. But in the other villages within the community, there were lots and lots of kids. Anyway, these particular kids were always causing trouble, making a lot of noise, dropping beer cans places, even though they weren't even of age to drink. And it was a real problem in the whole community, but in particular in this village. And so the HOA, the manager of the HOA, had spoken with the homeowner, the parents of these kids, and the kids just weren't getting in line. They just weren't following, the parents weren't disciplining the kids. They weren't really, leading a good example for the kids and so forth and so on. They were kind of like, just running on with no supervision. So the president gets a call from the manager of the property manager, just like in the last case I talked about. And he tells property manager tells the president of the HOA, these kids are at it again. They're riding bikes. They're causing mayhem, riding on people's lawns and this and that. And scaring people, driving right at them in their cars when they're on their bikes. And it's just it's getting worse and worse. It's escalating was the word that the property manager used in this case. So the president, who was worked out of his home at the time, he decides, he storms out of his house. He basically slams, his desk. He's so frustrated with these kids. He storms out, and as you can probably start to read, he's emotional, he's pissed, he's angry, he's fuming. He gets out, he runs out of his house, he sees the kids, and what does he do? Because of all this rage that he's going through, he's so frustrated, he actually grabs both of their bikes, pulls their bikes out from under them. The kids go falling down, and allege that he did that, and they allege he pushed them. And so you now have battery against 2 minors. And, it could be considered an aggravated battery. It was serious. An adult physically attacking 2 kids, even if the kids were unruly and breaking rules, it's still a criminal offense of this battery. So it was a very, very serious charge. And there was a ring camera. We're all familiar with these ring cameras now. They capture a lot of evidence. And believe me, the cops and the prosecutors, they rely on these ring cameras big time. And so they got the ring camera, they viewed it, and there was really no defense. It captured exactly what these kids said. And Mark and I have talked about rules of evidence and what's admissible in trial and what's not admissible in trial. If we had gone to trial, the jury would not have heard that these kids were, being disobedient and breaking the rules, every single day for the last year, and been told to stop, and they weren't stopping, and that the parents weren't helping at all. The jury never would have heard that. They would have seen this video. They would have heard the kids talk about what happened at this moment in time on that particular incident. And the other evidence probably would never have been admissible in court. The jury would not have heard it. And so we were stuck in a situation where I'm like to my client, we really don't have a great defense here. There's a video of it. There's 2 kids testifying to it. My client admitted to it to the police. He thought, hey, these kids are breaking every rule. I'm the president. It was time, for me. We've given them all sorts of instructions on what to do and what not to do, and they just won't follow them. So the easiest thing for me to do is to take their bikes from them, and then so forth. So we were left with really no defense. They weren't going to agree to a pretrial intervention or diversion or deferred prosecution, like I talked about earlier in the case. Talked about that with like these HOA situations. And so therefore, if you can't get in diversion, you go to trial, you lose, you get a conviction, you could go to jail. So I got to try to figure out, how do we work this case out in a way where my client, if we can't get these PTI or diversion programs because the victim's objecting to it and the statute requires them to agree to it, otherwise the prosecutor can't offer it, how do we get this guy out of this without a criminal record and without going to jail? Well, and when we don't have any good evidence to work with, and I'm talking to the prosecutor and I'm telling him what a great person he is, and he got triggered, and for one moment in his entire life, he crossed the line, and thank God no one was seriously injured, and the prosecutor wants to drop it, but they can't. So what do I come up with? I decide I got to stall. I got to delay. I got to drag this case out as long as possible. And that is a tactic that is strategic in the defense. I say to a lot of clients that, the older the case gets, the better it can get for the defendant, as long as the defendant doesn't get themselves in trouble while the case is pending. So if you follow the rules and you continue, and I say, look, to this case, most clients, you've lived your whole life and never been in trouble before. So while this case is pending, there's no reason to think you're going to get in trouble, So although it's frustrating to have this case hanging over your head, the strategy is very effective. The older the case gets, the better it gets for you, for a number of reasons. Number one, people could get in trouble. These kids might get arrested while the case is pending, and then their credibility is in question. Number two, your credibility grows as time goes on. You've lived your whole life, you haven't been in trouble. Let's say the case goes on for a year or 2 or 3 and you haven't done anything wrong. It shows that this was an isolated incident, that you are a good person, you're not a criminal. That helps in negotiating with the prosecutor. It also, some evidence can go missing. The ring camera for some reason, maybe they stored it in the trunk of the officer's car, and the heat in Florida at 100 degrees, 110 degrees in August, and it somehow, evaporates, or the officer loses it. So sometimes evidence, gets lost. Other cases become a priority. The prosecutor has other cases that are more important. So maybe as the case goes on and it's 2 years old, they say, oh, you know what, let's just get rid of this. I'll give you what you want. Or maybe the children grow up and now they're adults and they go off to college and they don't want to come back to have to testify in trial. They don't want to leave school for that. So for a million reasons, as long as the defendant stays out of trouble, the older the case gets, typically the better outcome the defense is going to get. There are other cases, like we all know the famous O.J. Simpson case, and we had a guest on the episode recently that you probably heard already that talked about the O.J. Simpson case. In that case, they tried to rush to trial because they didn't want to find, they were afraid the government would find or the police would find the gun, the weapon. So very rarely, but occasionally they will pursue speedy trial because they're afraid if you give the government more time, they'll build a stronger case. But more often than not, the delays do help the defense, although it is stressful for the defendant. In this case, I said to my client, let's stall, let's delay, and maybe, one or more of these reasons, will occur that will then result in us getting the best possible outcome. Well, we did get an incredible outcome, but for not a good reason. And it was not for the reason that I just stated when I gave, 5 or 10 reasons why delay is often an effective tactic. In this case, I delayed the case. Oh, by the way, the HOA hired me in this case. The actual homeowners, the lawyers for the HOA advised them to hire the lawyer because they were afraid that the community could get sued if they lost this case. And so they actually paid me, which was unusual. Usually you get paid by the defendant, the client, the individual accused of the crime and arrested for the crime. So my strategy to drag the case paid out, but not for the reasons I said before, not because the kids went off to college and didn't want to come home, or because the kids, the victims, had a change of heart and realized, oh, we were being stupid jerks and we deserved it. Nothing like that happened. And the client behaved all those years and didn't get in trouble, so that did happen. But the reason the case got dismissed in the end from my delay tactic and my stalling tactic is sadly because the defendant passed away. He died. It was that simple. So the good news is, when he died, he was not a convicted felon or convicted of any crime, misdemeanor or felony. He never had to go on probation and so forth. But and the case, gets dropped upon the death. I provide a death certificate to the court, and the case gets closed. And no, the HOA never got sued. The family eventually moved away. That actually happened while the case was pending too, but they were still in the same town, so they were still going to participate in the case. They just didn't live in that neighborhood anymore. So an outcome of a dismissal, but only because the defendant passed away, which is never a good thing. He was not that old. And
By the way, I just want to remind you and our listeners of an interesting little legal tidbit, which is along the lines of what you're saying. He was never convicted in the federal system, at least, and I think it may apply in the state, but in the federal system, if you are convicted of a crime and then you appeal the conviction, and while the appeal is pending, hasn't been decided, but the minute you file the notice of appeal and while it's pending, if you pass away, the conviction is overturned.
right,
There's no conviction of record.
yeah,
So the good news is you're exonerated, you won your case. The bad news is you're dead.
correct, yeah. No, it's not a good way to win the case, obviously.
No, not the preferable way.
No,
So I think, Guy, we've run out of time now.
yeah, it was fun.
Um,
I love.
it was fun. So we'll leave the world of HOAs to the uh,
Yeah, I don't want any more
fighting
HOAs.
members.
I don't
And
want
no,
any
me
more.
neither.
No more of those
No, me
cases.
neither.
But
So until the next time,
and hopefully next
uh,
time, hopefully you'll be here right next to me in the studio. I think.
yes,
Yeah, that'd be good.
absolutely.
All right then.
So until our next time, what we remind all of our listeners, viewers, and hopefully subscribers is uh, you're free to
Free to
go.
go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Mark Nurick and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.